Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions: the mystery of the Nephilim, what ancient texts actually say about giants before the flood. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction, not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. In the 6th chapter of Genesis, in 4 of the most debated verses in the entire Bible, there appears a race of beings called the Nephilim. The passage is brief, cryptic, and resistant to easy interpretation. The sons of God came to the daughters of men, children were born to them, and these children became the heroes and mighty men of old. The Nephilim were in the earth in those days. And then the flood came, and almost nothing more is said. From that handful of sentences, an entire mythology has grown. The Book of Enoch, a text discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls and still canonical in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, expands the story into an elaborate account of fallen angels, forbidden knowledge, and a race of giants whose violence made the flood necessary. The internet has added a further layer: hoaxed photographs of enormous human skeletons, viral claims of suppressed giant discoveries, and elaborate theories about a pre-flood civilization of superhuman beings. The actual textual and archaeological evidence is more interesting and stranger than any of those fabrications. The real question is what the ancient authors thought they were recording, and whether any historical memory lies behind the myth. This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the wider world of ancient technological anomalies, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. The official story of technological progress follows a reassuring arc: stone tools giving way to bronze, bronze to iron, iron to steel, and finally the Industrial Revolution catapulting humanity into the modern age. In this narrative, each generation inherits a slightly more sophisticated toolkit than the last, and no knowledge is ever truly lost. It is a comfortable story. It is also, in key respects, demonstrably false. History is littered with technological achievements that appeared centuries before their supposed invention, vanished after the cultures that created them collapsed, and were reinvented, often with great difficulty, by later civilizations who had no idea the knowledge had ever existed. Roman concrete was stronger and more durable than most modern concrete, and was not matched again until the 21st century. Greek fire, the incendiary weapon that protected the Byzantine Empire for centuries, has never been fully reproduced. Damascus steel, capable of holding an edge that modern metallurgists struggle to replicate, disappeared with the craftsmen who made it. These are not myths. They are documented historical losses of genuine technical knowledge. When we encounter an object from the ancient world that should not exist, a battery from Baghdad dated to the Parthian era, a computing mechanism salvaged from an ancient shipwreck, a map showing geographical features that were not officially discovered for another millennium, the temptation is to dismiss it as misidentified or misstated. That dismissal is sometimes warranted. But when such objects accumulate, when the pattern becomes too consistent to ignore, the honest response is to ask whether our model of ancient capability is simply wrong. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades. And patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter, The core evidence surrounding the Nephilim, what ancient texts actually say about giants before the flood, is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. Genesis 6:4 in the Hebrew Bible reads, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." The passage does not describe their appearance, height, or ultimate fate, and offers no explanation of what sons of God means, a gap that generated centuries of interpretive controversy. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered the Book of Enoch, a Jewish text dated approximately 300 to 200 BC and found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, expands the Genesis passage into a detailed narrative. 200 angelic beings, called Watchers, descended to Mount Hermon, took human wives, and fathered giant offspring. They also taught humanity forbidden arts, metalworking, cosmetics, sorcery, and the cutting of roots, knowledge that corrupted human civilization. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this, and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine. The height of the Philistine champion Goliath varies between ancient manuscripts. The Masoretic text, the standard Hebrew Bible, gives his height as 6 cubits and a span approximately 9 meters. But the oldest surviving manuscript tradition, preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls fragment for Q-Sama and the Septuagint, gives his height as 4 cubits and a span approximately 2.06 meters, a very tall but human-scale figure. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation. But the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, the Rephaim and Anakim appear multiple times in the Hebrew Bible as pre-Israelite populations of Canaan, notable for their unusual stature. Og of Bashan, described in Deuteronomy, possessed an iron bed measuring approximately 4 meters by nearly 2 meters. These references may preserve cultural memory of specific Bronze Age populations or individuals rather than a distinct race of giants. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of the Cardiff giant, exhibited in 1869 in Cardiff, New York, and claimed to be the petrified body of a biblical giant, was one of the most successful hoaxes in American history. Hundreds of thousands of people paid to view it before it was exposed as a carved gypsum statue. No authenticated giant human skeleton, meaning one accepted by professional physical anthropology after proper excavation and analysis, has ever been discovered. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding: pituitary gigantism, caused by tumors of the pituitary gland, produces extreme height in affected individuals. The tallest verified human in modern records, Robert Wadlow, reached 72 meters. Such individuals appear in every era and culture. Historical accounts of unusually tall warriors or rulers almost certainly reflect genuine individuals with endocrine conditions rather than evidence of a separate species. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations. And in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain the Nephilim. What ancient texts actually say about giants before the flood. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that the Nephilim were a historical memory of an earlier, physically larger pre-flood human population that existed before the genetic bottleneck of the flood event. The literal reading advanced in popular books and documentaries. This interpretation has no support in paleoanthropology, which has identified no hominin species matching the biblical description, and all circulating giant skeleton photographs are documented fabrications or misidentified fossils. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence. But it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that sons of God were angelic or divine beings who crossed a cosmic boundary to reproduce with human women, producing hybrid giant offspring whose violence necessitated the flood, the supernatural interpretation found in the Book of Enoch and adopted by many early Christian writers, including Justin Martyr and Tertullian. It reads the text most literally, but requires accepting a cosmology in which divine-human hybridization was biologically possible. Most modern theologians reject it as incompatible with later theological development. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that sons of God denotes powerful rulers or elites who took women from lower social classes by force, a sociological reading that is the dominant position in mainstream academic biblical scholarship. On this reading, the Nephilim were simply the offspring of powerful men, perhaps a warrior aristocracy, and the passage is a polemic against tyrannical rulers whose abuses made divine judgment inevitable. It requires no supernatural element, but is criticized for draining the passage of its apparent mythological content. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding the Nephilim, what ancient texts actually say about giants before the flood, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes the Dead Sea Scrolls fragment for Q-Sama, discovered at Qumran and dated to the 1st century BC, preserves the earlier reading of Goliath's height as 4 cubits and a span rather than 6. This resolves a long-standing textual problem. The larger figure appears to have entered the tradition through scribal amplification and demonstrates that the giant tradition grew over time through manuscript transmission rather than representing a stable original account. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented. The Book of Enoch was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, confirming it was in active circulation within Second Temple Judaism by the 2nd or 1st century BC and was treated as authoritative scripture by at least some Jewish communities. Its continued canonical status in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church shows that the Watcher Nephilim tradition was not merely a fringe interpretation, but a mainstream strand of ancient Jewish and early Christian theology. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed paleontological and paleoanthropological surveys of the ancient Near East have identified no skeletal remains of a giant hominin species. What the archaeological record does show is that the Anakim and Rephaim were actual named populations in Bronze Age canon. They appear in Egyptian execration texts and in the Amarna letters, suggesting these were real ethnic or political groups whose memory survived into the biblical period, perhaps remembered as formidable because of their military reputation rather than their physical size. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding the Nephilim, what ancient texts actually say about giants before the flood. Now we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. The Nephilim continue to generate enormous popular interest, sustained by a steady supply of fabricated giant skeleton photographs that circulate on social media despite having been debunked repeatedly. Most were created as entries in a worth 1,000 ph Odo manipulation contest in the early 2000s. Academic study of the tradition has advanced considerably. Ongoing Dead Sea Scrolls analysis, including newly fragmented material from Cave 4, continues to clarify the manuscript tradition. The Book of Enoch remains canonical for Ethiopian Orthodox Christians and is widely read beyond that community. The mainstream scholarly position that the Nephilim passage reflects ancient Near Eastern mythological tropes about divine human boundaries rather than a historical record of a giant race is unlikely to satisfy those seeking a more dramatic answer, but it is the most defensible reading of the available evidence. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of the Nephilim, what ancient texts actually say about giants before the flood, from the historical record, through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Nephilim ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please subscribe to the channel. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment below telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.